Now, the topic that we are going to discuss today is the febrile response. Since you are the students who have just entered the clinical side, one of the commonest presentations of a patient with disease is fever, and you must know what is fever. Generally, every one of you would have experienced fever sometime or the other, but you do not know the intricacy of fever. And people get worried, including the doctor sometimes. Fever is up, fever is going up, fever is going up. Or they think that if the temperature is coming down by 1 degree, there is a sort of lot of improvement in the patient. Both are not warranted. You must understand what is called thermoregulation. Thermoregulation means how the temperature, body temperature is kept in such a narrow range in spite of there being several variations that are possible for the temperature to shoot up or go down. So there is a thermoregulatory center. Where is that? It is in the hypothalamus. The preoptic nuclei of the hypothalamus have a center called the thermoregulatory center. This thermoregulatory center is supplied by the information from two sources. One, the blood bathing the hypothalamus senses the temperature, and there are temperature sensors and inform the hypothalamus. The other are the peripheral impulses from the skin about the warmth and the ambient temperature. You know, the peripheral impulses from the eyes and the skin, and we see very hot sun and the ambient temperature is very high and the skin feels the heat. All that is also informed to the hypothalamus. So there is two types of heat here. One is called the endogenous heat. The other is called the exogenous heat. Endogenous heat means the heat produced within the body. How is it produced? Every reaction, you know, ultimately ends up in carbon dioxide, water and energy, and it is an exothermic reaction. So it produces heat. The heat is primarily produced by metabolism in the tissues, particularly in the muscle and also in the liver. Muscle and liver are the two important things that can produce, okay? That can produce the endogenous heat. This heat, I'll try to reduce the pen size. Okay, this heat is dissipated by the body because of the hypothalamic connections, and these hypothalamic connections are very important in regulating the heat. Now, what is the normal body temperature? All of you should remember that normal body temperature means it is not 98.4. Most of you will say 98.4. It is not like the height of an electric pole or your blood group to be constant. It is a thing that is dynamic. There is what is called day-to-day variation. There is a circadian variation. That is, during the 24-hour cycle, the temperature fluctuates. It can be as low as 97.7 to as high as 99.5 in different times of the day. So consistently, if it is more than say 99.5, then you can say person is febrile. And in centigrade, we have to express usually 37 is equivalent to 97.4, and then that is 0.5 that side and 0.5 this side is the normal body temperature. This is very important for you to know, because patient will call you, sir, my temperature is 97.7, it is going down. No, it's not like that. That is a normal variation. Like that, you know, somebody has got a 99.4 or 99.3 on one occasion in the whole day, it is still not fever. So, it has to satisfy consistently, it should be more than 99.5 or less than 97.7. In centigrade also I have given. This is called the circadian variation. There is also a variation in females due to ovulation. So before ovulation, temperature is around half degree to 1 degree Fahrenheit less. On the day of ovulation, the temperature is roughly 1 degree higher. So we can pinpoint the day of ovulation if you carefully record the body temperature also. Okay, that is the way we have to understand. So thermoregulation is possible because of the hypothalamus. This hypothalamus has got two inputs. One is the blood bathing the hypothalamus, the way the blood that is circulating around that, and other is the peripheral impulses from the skin and tissues about the temperature. The metabolic heat is generated mainly in the muscle and in the liver. Okay. How to record the temperature? All of you must be familiar. If not, you do it now. Earlier days, we used to have mercury thermometers. These should no more be used because mercury is a dangerous chemical and there is an international ban on the use of mercury in medicine. Either to use mercury manometer or the mercury thermometer, it is forbidden because the moment the mercury spills on the body, it can produce toxicity. So no more mercury things. Then what are the things available? You have what are called the digital thermometers. So where you keep the thermometer either in the mouth or in the armpit of the children and then record, and it is the small sensor is there. The sensor will give you the information and it can be read in digits as clearly as 98.8 or whatever is the, and it can be available in two types also. You can convert into centigrade or into Fahrenheit and you can choose the mode of recording. This is the common type of recording, digital thermometer. Also, you can record, digital thermometers are available for rectal recording and also for the skin recording. Skin recordings are called the IR thermometers. That is infrared thermometer. This is what you do nowadays in the COVID checking in all the companies and factories and apartment complexes. Somebody will be checking the temperature without touching the patient. From a distance you punch an IR gun and the temperature is reflected back onto the device in a digital form. These are slightly lesser. Skin temperature is slightly lower than the core temperature. How do I got the core temperature? Either oral or rectal. Rectal is preferable but not routinely practiced. In children, rectal thermometer will be very useful. There is another thermometer called the tympanic thermometer. Most of you may not be aware. You Google and see. It's an expensive device. Just a soft tube-like thing will be inserted into the external auditory canal, and the radiant heat from the tympanic membrane is recorded. It is very accurate, and in fact, the easiest one to use in case of children. It may cost around 12,000 to 13,000. Not commonly used. Commonly used digital thermometer or the skin IR thermometer. These are the two things that are commonly used. No more mercury thermometers. So I told you about the circadian variation and also about the ovulation part. Heat production is a metabolic activity of the liver, and then whenever there is a requirement for the heat to be produced, okay, whenever you require to generate heat, there will be muscles will contract and produce shivering. Shivering generates heat. So heat dissipation, this is about the heat production. So whatever heat that is produced in the body has to go out, and that is done by two organs, namely the skin and the lungs. So skin blood vessels act as a radiator of the car. They open up and close depending on the need. If heat has to go out, there will be vasodilatation of the skin blood vessels and the heat dissipates out as perspiration will start, and the perspiration means water. That water has to evaporate. That evaporation uses the skin temperature and then the temperature drops. Likewise, lungs also excrete a good quantity of air containing warmth, and that is the excretion through the dissipation through the lungs. We don't say excretion, we say dissipation. Okay, what is fever? Most important concept all of you have to understand. Fever is a warning sign. Fever is a protective mechanism. Fever is not harmful. Supposing you have very serious infection without being told by the fever, and we end up in fatality. Is having pain on the foot a bane or a boon? If you don't have pain on the foot, everything you strike, you injure, and you do not know you are injured. Just as the pain is a boon and not a curse or a bane, fever is a boon. Fever is a positive indication that there is something wrong in the body for you to take action. So don't be worried if somebody says, I have 101 fever. Good, that is able to react to the pyrogen there, and then you take care of the fever and understand what is the fever and try to treat the cause rather than to suppress the fever. Suppressing fever is required only if the temperature is very high. Otherwise, we have no business to reduce the temperature once it is less than 100. Anything less than 100 doesn't warrant any treatment for fever per se. But you have to follow the underlying cause and treat the fever. And fever will automatically come down once the cause is treated. So what happens? There is a normothermic fever. There is another thing called the hyperthermic situation. Normothermic means there is a thermostat. I told you the hypothalamus maintains just like your AC thermostat. There is a beautiful thermostat which responds 24 by 7 to the needs of the body. That thermostat is set at the above temperature of 97.7 to 99.5, an average being 98.4. It is set at that temperature. 98.4 it is set, and the body temperature fluctuates in that small range. And what happens? Whenever there is a pyrogen or whenever there is a toxic substance, either an exotoxin or an endotoxin, it resets the thermostat to a higher level. That means it will reset the thermostat. Okay, now you keep the body temperature at 100.5 or 100, like that it will reset it up. Why that is required? Whenever there is a pyrogen or a toxic insult to the body requires hyper metabolism, requires to feed the tissues with greater oxygen, more nutrients. For that, what is required? The temperature has to be higher to tackle the situation. For that reason, as a protective phenomenon, the thermostat is upregulated or fixed at a higher degree, 1 degree or so. Supposing after a day or two the infection is still overwhelming, the thermostat is shifted 1 more degree up, let us say 101 or 102. At that point, the thermostat will make sure that the body has enough warmth and temperature to deal with the metabolic demand created by the toxin or the pyrogen. Pyro means fire, pyrogen means one which generates heat, or fire which is fever. Okay, how does the thermostat, once it is set up, how does the body respond? The body responds to raise the body temperature by vasoconstriction. It prevents heat loss by constricting the blood vessels, narrowing the blood vessels of the skin particularly, and reducing the blood flow. The heat dissipation or heat loss is reduced, and it stimulates shivering so that muscles generate heat. It also stimulates heat generation by the liver, and the new body demand of higher heat as dictated by the thermostat is maintained. That is why, whenever somebody is going to get fever, then what will happen? They will have very dry skin, constricted skin, no sweating, and they start shivering. This is a body's defense mechanism. It is nothing wrong. But all the same, if it goes to a little beyond 101 or so, it becomes uncomfortable, then you need to support by bringing down to a little lower level. Then how does it, once the thermostat is reset, then vasodilatation occurs. And sweating, once the thermostat is set back to the normal level. After the pyrogen is removed or after the toxic insult is no more working in the body, the thermostat is brought back to its original level of 98.4 and around that. Then what happens? The skin blood vessels start opening up. That is vasodilatation, and then Sweating will be there. Sweat has to be absorbed into the atmosphere, means water has to become vapor. That means it requires heat. That heat is supplied by the underlying circulating blood because of vasodilatation. So, so anybody who is getting sort of to normalcy, he will experience wet skin and sweating, and also he will experience the vasodilatation and then sweating. Okay. A fever of 106.6.7 or more than 145, 41.5 is called hyperpyrexia. Hyperpyrexia means any temperature which is beyond 41.5 or more than 106.7 Fahrenheit is called hyperpyrexia. The hyperpyrexia, several causes are there. Most importantly, brain hemorrhage, pontine hemorrhage, cerebral trauma are the ones which cause hyperpyrexia. There is another condition called heat stroke. This also produces high temperature. But here it is not that the thermostat is upregulated. It is in fact the thermostat failure because of sudden excessive ambient heat entering into the body and without fluid there, and also there is dehydration. That increases the core temperature of the body to around 106.7 or more. Here thermostat failure and not thermostat upregulation. So you understand that fever and heat stroke are not same. Heat stroke has got temperature very high, but it does not respond to your paracetamol or any of the drugs which try to reduce the fever. Because there the thermostat is not working. Unless the thermostat is working, these drugs cannot act. So pyrogenic molecules are those which are there in the infection, either bacterial, fungal, viral. All these infections they produce pyrogenesis, or pyro is fire, pyrogenesis, warmth or heat genesis. These molecules, as I told you, how they act? They reset the thermostat. They go and inform the thermostat, or take the switch away. I will show you the diagram. In such a way the thermostat is kept at a higher level. That is why these infections produce fever. Fever is an alarming sign. Fever is a warning sign. Fever is a protective sign. Fever is not harmful, provided it is within a reasonable limit. And if it is the body temperature goes beyond 104, 105, all the enzymes are proteins, and these proteins get denatured at that heat and they cannot function optimally. So we are bound to reduce the temperature to reasonable levels of less than 101 in such situation. Otherwise, fever is a very good boon for all of us. This concept you must have. The fear about fever should go away. The cause of the fever should be understood and treated. Then hyperthermia, as we have seen earlier, due to cerebral trauma, pontine hemorrhage, or due to hyperpyric heat stroke, is highly fatal, and immediate response is essential. Heat stroke does not respond to antipyretics. Microbial products, microbial toxins, either exotoxins or endotoxins, and whole microorganisms themselves, including the viruses, the dengue virus, or any influenza virus, or any virus for that matter, chickenpox virus, hepatitis virus, and today we have the COVID virus. These all produce fever. We need to know. How does these produce? There are what are called molecules, cytokines. Cyto means cell, kinesis means movement. Those chemicals which induce movement of chemicals within the body are cytokines. These are small proteins of a molecular weight of 10 to 20 kilodaltons, and then 10 to 20 kilodaltons, and they regulate immune, inflammatory, and hematopoietic processes. So cytokines are protective molecules. Cytokines are not dangerous. But at the same time, if the cytokines are produced in an unchecked manner, and the body is not able to regulate the production at a required level, and the production goes unchecked, that is what is called the cytokine excess or cytokine storm, and that can lead to danger. What happens? Endogenous pyrogens, now called pyrogenic cytokines. So we know exogenous from the viruses, from the bacteria and all that, and their exo and endotoxins. Once they enter the body, they generate cytokines. These cytokines are our own molecules produced from our own cells, particularly from the liver, muscle, blood vessels, endothelium, lungs, everywhere. And these cytokines are endogenous pyrogens. They are also called the pyrogenic cytokines. What are the pyrogenic cytokines? Interleukin 1, interleukin 6, tumor necrosis factor alpha, ciliary neutrophilic factor called the CNF, or interferon alpha treatment. Not interferon alpha by itself, treatment with interferon alpha can also act as a pyrogen. In the absence of microbial infection, inflammation can cause fever. It could be infection or it could be inflammation. Sometimes it could be trauma also, which can cause pyrogenesis. Okay, inflammation, infection, and trauma. Sometimes this inflammation can be autoimmune inflammation or from outside. Suppose there is an inflammation due to autoimmune disease, that can also produce fever. PGE2, prostaglandin E2, is the end product that is elevated in the hypothalamic tissue and in the third ventricle of the brain. Okay, you know the two lateral ventricles, the third ventricle and the fourth ventricle, and hypothalamus is bathed and by the blood around the third ventricle, and hypothalamus, due to the pyrogen response, either exogenous or toxins or whatever it is, produce endogenous pyrogens called the interleukin 1, 2 and TNF alpha and CNF, and these act on the hypothalamus to produce an end product called the PGE2, which is called the prostaglandin E2. Okay, let us look at this diagram. Infection, microbial toxins, mediators of inflammation, immune reactions, autoimmune reactions, all these act on the cells called the monocytes, macrophages, endothelial cells, and other tissue cells in the liver, and they produce pyrogenic cytokines. As I have told you, interleukin 1, interleukin 6, TNF, and interferon. And these act here on the hypothalamic endothelium. The blood circulating around the hypothalamic has got endothelium in the sinusoids, and the sinusoidal endothelium is affected or stimulated, which produces a substance called prostaglandin E2. And this prostaglandin E2 is a powerful stimulator of cyclic AMP. AMP is adenosine monophosphate. This adenosine monophosphate is in a chain form. Once the PGE2 is there, it folds itself into a cycle and becomes a cyclic AMP. That cyclic AMP elevates the thermoregulatory set point. We know that fever is due to the elevation or upregulation of the thermoregulatory set point, and that is done by the cyclic AMP, which is stimulated by the PGE2. PGE2 is produced by the pyrogenic cytokines, interleukin 1, 6, TNF, and IFN. And these are from where? These are from the blood cells, monocytes, macrophages, endothelial cells of the liver, endothelial cells of the blood vessels, everywhere. Who asks them to work hard and produce these pyrogens? It is the infection, it is the toxins, endo and exotoxins, or any mediators of inflammation, trauma, and then immune reactions, auto or heteroimmunity. Likewise, microbial toxins, particularly from the bacteria, they can directly, without the IL-1, IL-2 and TNF, they can influence the hypothalamic endothelium by their very toxic nature, and this hypothalamus produces PGE2 without the mediation of these IL-1, 2, TNF and INF. So you may be knowing that in the present COVID situation, interleukin 6, they are measuring. What is that? It is measuring the cytokine. Normally there will be some elevation in mild COVID also. But if the interleukin production is not controlled by the body because the regulating mechanism has failed, and then the interleukin production is in excess, that increases the cytokine levels in the body, which we call cytokine storm. And this interleukin 6, not only it increases the thermoregulatory set point, it has got several detrimental effects on the vasculature, including multi-organ failure. That is why we recognize and treat it. Then how do I approach? There are electronic devices today for measuring the oral tympanic membrane temperature, rectal temperatures. I have already told you. Just Google tympanic thermometer, you will see that, right? Likewise rectal and also the digital thermometers. Chronic hepatic and renal failure and patients in glucocorticoids. Okay, people who have chronic liver disease, chronic kidney disease, people who are on steroids, people who are on anti-cytokine medications like anakinra and other anti-cytokine medications. Though they have active infection, their fever response is blunted because all these things reduce the cytokines like TNF alpha and then the interleukin 1 and interleukin 6 all are reduced because of these things, and you may not have the appropriate degree of elevation of temperature in chronic liver disease, renal failure, people on steroids, people on anti-cytokine drugs. So remember that. How do I work up? Do a complete blood count. This is the white blood cells, red blood cells, and then the platelets, and also a differential count. And also look for nuclear lymphocyte ratio. That means in normal bacterial infections, the neutrophil lymphocyte ratio, neutrophils are very much more. This is the acute phase response, but the lymphocytes may be around normal 20%. In this infection, present COVID, the neutrophils are normal, but the lymphocytes go down. So much so, NL ratio, normally it should be 80 is to 20 or 1 is to 4 is to 1, and NL ratio is shifted because lymphocytes become very less, 90 is to 10, and then it becomes very NL ratio is shifted more than 4 is to 1, maybe 5 is to 1 or 6 is to 1, like that. So that's important in the present pandemic. Anyway, looking at the blood count, we know what sort of infection. Differential count also. Chronic infections produce lymphocytosis. Acute bacterial infections produce neutrophil excess. And also important markers are CRP, C-reactive protein. The C-reactive protein is not specific for any disease. Today everybody is saying the CRP in a patient of COVID is raised. It is not specific to coronavirus alone. But CRP is a general reactant, just like the erythrocyte sedimentation rate. Nevertheless, it is a good predictor of prognosis in case of people who are in moderate or severe disease. Okay, treatment of fever and its symptoms with routine antipyretics does not harm or does not slow the resolution of common viral bacterial infections. It is a misconception that if the fever is controlled by antipyretics, the viral infection or the bacterial infection gets controlled. It is not. Even if you reduce the temperature by antipyretic, neither it will increase nor it will decrease. The process will take its own course as modified by the treatment by you. So if it is bacterial infection, use appropriate antibiotic and then kill the bacteria. So much so the pyrogen itself is not there and the fever comes down. Support the patient with antipyretics if it is more than 101. No non-steroidal antihistamic, anti-inflammatory drugs like ibuprofen, ketoprofen, or diclofenac, or any of the things, nor steroids, unless they are indicated. They never start in a case of fever. Never start on steroids or NSAIDs unless there is an indication. Here, for example, in the COVID present day pandemic, first 5 days to 7 days, mild illness, there is no indication for steroid. Okay, once the patient is moving to moderate indication, you have to give very powerful steroid because there is excess of immune response there, inflammatory response, and then cytokines. And in order to suppress the immune inflammation, a powerful steroid is an excellent weapon to treat patients of COVID, moderate and severe. Okay, what you should also know what is called the pulse temperature dissociation. This is called relative bradycardia. That means temperature is 101. We know for every 10, 1 degree rise in Fahrenheit, 10 beats should be increased in the pulse. So that means this is roughly 3 degrees. So we require 30 beats to increase. Normal is 80, 80 plus 30, 110. But in a given patient, let us say, has got 101 fever, but the pulse rate is 96. That means there is relative bradycardia or temperature pulse dissociation. This is a classical feature of typhoid, brucellosis, leptospirosis, drug-induced fevers, and fictitious fever. Means, somebody goes into the hot sun, stays there, and then reads the skin temperature 101, but then his pulse rate will not go. That is fictitious fever. Plasmodium vivax, a malarial organism, malarial parasite, causes fever every third day. This is called tertian malaria, and whereas in quartan malaria, P malaria produces every fourth day. So vivax malaria and then P malaria, ovale malaria, quartan malaria, tertian malaria every third day, quartan malaria every fourth day. Relapsing fever means in borreliosis, what happens is he will have fever of 4-5 days and then becomes afebrile again to relapse into additional days of fever. He will be afebrile for 5-6 days. Again he relapses with fever. That is why it is relapsing fever due to borreliosis. Pell-Epstein pattern. What is Pell-Epstein pattern? Fever lasting for 3 to 10 days, followed by afebrile periods of 3 to 10 days. And this pattern is classical for Hodgkin's disease and other lymphomas. So, the difference between relapsing fever and Pell-Epstein fever is there it is around 2 to 3 days or 5 days at the most and relapses once. Whereas in this case, these cycles of fever and afebrile state keep on coming, and that is called the Pell-Epstein fever, one of the clinical indications of Hodgkin's disease or other lymphomas. Cyclic neutropenia is in every 21 days, the neutrophils are recycled. Once the recycling occurs, they will have fever. That is, fever occurring once in 3 weeks is maybe due to cyclic neutropenia. Autoinflammatory conditions, autoimmune disorders like rheumatoid arthritis, Sjogren's syndrome, systemic lupus erythematosus, polyarthritis nodosa, or any one of the autoimmune conditions can produce fever. Likewise, autoinflammatory diseases of the liver, chronic autoimmune inflammation of the liver, autoimmune inflammatory diseases or inflammatory diseases of the kidney and the liver, either autoimmune or autoinflammatory, they can also produce fever. These are apart from the bacterial and viral infections, and apart from the things which we have discussed, autoinflammatory, autoimmune diseases are important causes of fever. Reduction of fever by lowering the elevated hypothalamic regulatory center. How do we try to reduce the fever? Regulatory center. By the hypothalamic center is upregulated, and that upregulated center we try to bring it back to normal by lowering the elevated regulatory center. Fever can be reduced. That is how we do. So how do we treat? We give acetaminophen or paracetamol, which is called in this country. In Western countries, it is called acetaminophen. In our country, it is called paracetamol. Both are the same. And then aspirin, which is a very good sort of antipyretic. Earlier days, all children are being treated with low-dose aspirin as the treatment for their fever. And of course, paracetamol is also equally good. Aspirin has got certain disadvantages related to other fronts in the blood. So better to use paracetamol rather than aspirin. Paracetamol, also known as acetaminophen in Western countries. What does it do? The set point is a direct function of the level of PGE2. We understood that once the PGE2 is there, this PGE2 will form the cyclic AMP. And the cyclic AMP is the one which sets the switch at a higher level, like somebody going and switching on the main switch or putting the regulator at a higher level. For example, you have a fan going on. So when it is blowing, one, you feel uncomfortable. So what you do, you wanted to increase it to higher speed, you go and use the regulator switch and move it to 2, 3 or 4 position. And with your hand you move the switch or you press a button. Or the digital fans you control with the remote. This PGE2 exactly does that. Like, resetting the switch of the thermostat to a required level of 0.5 to 1 degree at a time, and depending on the requirement it will even go another 1, 2, 3 degrees also. It will reset. How does it do? It sends the messenger called cyclic AMP, and this cyclic AMP raises the thermostat level at which it is set. Okay. Now, who produces PGA2? Hypothalamic endothelium. The blood vessels of the hypothalamic region, the endothelial cells secrete the PGA2. Under whose influence they secrete? Either by the bacterial toxins themselves directly or through the cytokine pyrogens. Cytokines like the IL-1, IL-2, TNF alpha, interferon, these are the molecules which inform the endothelium of the hypothalamus to secrete more PGE2. Now what we are trying to do? We want to bring down the PGE2 level in the thermoregulatory center, so much so the cyclic AMP is less, the thermoregulatory switch is lowered so that the temperature comes down. When the thermoregulatory center is lowered, hypothalamus sends impulses to the skin to dilate the blood vessels. Once the blood vessels dilate, there is more flow of blood into the skin and there is a chance for the heat to be easily decimated. And simultaneously, sweat glands are stimulated, sweat glands produce excess sweat, droplets of water, the sweat water will be on the skin. These have to be evaporated, and for the evaporation you require heat. That heat is drawn from the skin through the blood, the heat flows into the water of the sweat evaporates, and then temperature is brought down. That is why you see, when you take paracetamol, patient will say, "Sir, ullanta chamata position, sir. Thara jaram tagipayindi." That's how it works. And who has produced the sweating? Sweating is because of the stimulation from the hypothalamus, both vasodilatation and sweat gland stimulation, because we lowered the switch of PGE2 to a lower level. So the body has purposefully kept it at some level. If we frequently keep on lowering it unnecessarily, the body's defense may not be working properly. So do not treat, that's why, do not treat the fever unless it is 100 or more. The synthesis of PGE2 depends upon the constitutively expressed enzyme cyclooxygenase. That's what we have discussed. The substrate for the cyclooxygenase, that is arachidonic acid. Arachidonic acid is released from where? From the cell membranes. So this is the release. This release is the rate limiting step in the synthesis of PGE2. Therefore, inhibitors of cyclooxygenase are potent antipyretic agents. So whatever you are giving, antipyretic paracetamol or even NSAIDs, they are potent inhibitors of cyclooxygenase. Cyclooxygenase is required for cyclic AMP synthesis, and that's how they reduce the PGE2. The antipyretic potency of various drugs is directly correlated to with the inhibition of brain cyclooxygenase. The cyclooxygenase circulating is different from the brain cyclooxygenase. Acetaminophen is a poor cyclooxygenase inhibitor in the peripheral tissues, but It has got no noteworthy anti-inflammatory activity in the peripheral tissue. This cyclooxygenase is also important for inflammation. If it is acting on the peripheral cyclooxygenase, it will be anti-inflammatory. That is what the NSAIDs do. The NSAIDs are potent suppressors of cyclooxygenase both in the brain and in the tissues. That is why they reduce the temperature and they act as antipyretics and also anti-inflammatory. Whereas paracetamol is not a peripheral cyclooxygenase inhibitor, it is a central inhibitor in the brain. That is why we lack an inflammatory, anti-inflammatory action for paracetamol. In brain, however, acetaminophen is oxidized by the cytochrome enzymes 450 system, and this oxidized form of the paracetamol inhibits the cyclooxygenase in the brain. That is why the acetaminophen is not having anti-inflammatory in the periphery because we don't have cytochrome P450 to convert it into an oxidized form. Only the oxidized form can act on the brain, and that occurs in the brain. Moreover, in brain, the inhibition of another enzyme called COX-3 enzyme, there are COX-1, COX-2, COX-3. COX is nothing but cyclooxygenase only. Cyclooxygenase 1, 2 and 3. And this 3 is inhibited by acetaminophen. This may account for its antipyretic effect by the COX-1 and COX-3 and not COX-2. However, COX-3 is not found outside the CNS. Objectives in treating fever are first to reduce the elevated hypothalamic set point to a lower level, second to facilitate the heat loss. Reducing fever with antipyretics also reduces systemic symptoms like myalgia, arthralgia, and then headache and other things. That is why paracetamol is useful to reduce myalgia as well as headache and arthralgia and also the fever. Glucocorticoids act at two levels. First, similar to the cyclooxygenase inhibitor, glucocorticoids reduce the PGE2 synthesis by inhibiting the activity of phospholipase A2, which is needed to the release of arachidonic acid from the cell membrane. So imagine this is the cell and there is a cell membrane and this secretes arachidonic acid. This arachidonic acid is the substrate for the PGE2. Okay, it is the substrate for PGE2, and this arachidonic acid is released is dependent upon phospholipase A2. And these steroids will go and interfere and then inhibit the phospholipase A2. So much arachidonic acid is not produced. When arachidonic acid is not there, PGE is not there. When PGE is not there, cyclooxygenase is not activated. So cyclic AMP is not formed. Thermostat is reset downward, which is needed for the arachidonic acid from the cell membrane. Secondly, this is action 1. Action 2 is glucocorticoids block the transcription of mRNA for pyrogenic cytokines. What are these pyrogenic cytokines? Interleukin 1, interleukin 6, TNF alpha, and IFN, and then the neutrophilic factor. Okay, these are the ones which have to be transcribed, means Xerox copied. There will be one molecule and there will be a blueprint of that as a Xerox copy, how it looks like, and that is called, that will be given to the mRNA. mRNA sees that and then produces many copies of that very quickly, just as an original author card is made into 100 copies in no time. That mRNA transcription is blocked by the glucocorticoids. That is why they are potent interleukin 6 and interleukin 1 blockers, which are highly useful in moderate to severe disease of COVID-19. Limited experimental evidence indicates that ibuprofen and COX-2 inhibitors like celecoxib and etirocoxib, they also reduce interleukin 1 and interleukin 6. This is not completely understood. That is why we are not using NSAIDs to treat the inflammatory overreactivity in COVID, because this is only an experimental evidence. Supposing we have drugs which prove that they work in addition to steroids, Maybe they will be tomorrow's treatment for the hyperimmune response that we see in the present day COVID. So what is the summary of today's class? So we have understood what is thermoregulatory center, what is normal body temperature, how it is regulated, and then particularly this diagram, you remember very well. This document I am sharing with your class representative. Let him circulate to you. You can see this. I'll save the notes also along with this, so that the saved one with the notes will be shared to you. Okay, and then how do I approach a patient of fever? How do I record the temperature? And then what are the conditions in which the temperature is blunted? And then what is the workup that I do? The basic blood test, like complete blood count and differential count and CRP and ESR. Depending on the pathogen you are suspecting, you do other things like urine culture, blood culture. You do other antibody tests to detect the disease. And in case of COVID, we are doing the nasopharyngeal swabs. Why we are doing nasopharyngeal? Why not take the blood directly from the patient and then do the virus in the blood? Have any idea? The present day, we don't have a COVID virus test, RT-PCR test directly on the blood. As well we can do, why put something in the nose and take a swab, and blood test will be more standard to take the blood and analyze rather than taking a swab from the nose. Why it is done? Because COVID virus is a local virus. It works on the mucous membrane of the respiratory tree and the lungs only, and it does not get into the blood in large quantities. There is no viremia. The viremic phase is only first 4 or 5 days of the infection. During the first 4 or 5 days, usually they are in the pre-symptomatic stage, and that stage only mild viremia is there. That also is not very severe, and the blood test is not efficient to detect the COVID virus. So after 5 days, there is no more viremia. Then what is all this havoc? All this havoc is the immune inflammation that is produced, and then cytokine excess and the blood clotting or thrombogenic profile or thrombogenic mechanisms that are triggered, causing intravascular, endovascular thrombosis. So the main problem is hyperinflammation, cytokine excess, and then all the organs are not functioning because the excess cytokines damage the organ function, multi-organ function, damage occurring, and also there is thrombogenesis. That means occurring of clots in the blood vessels. That is why the basic stay of treatment is in moderate and severe disease of COVID, give very powerful steroid for a short, quick course, and also give anticoagulant. Support the body with oxygenation.